Welcome back to our study of Leviticus. In this session, we're going to continue to look at the instructions that God has given the people of Israel through Moses. And so in that way, it will be similar to these last few sessions, but in other ways, it will be a little bit different because these last sessions have really tended to focus on a particular part of Israel's life, their worship or their sexual life. And in this particular session, we're going to look at chapters 19 and 20. And what we're going to find in these chapters is a lot more laws, a lot more commands and decrees, and then also some reasons to follow them. So my assumption is that you probably have engaged the text a little bit in preparation for our time together, but I also would like to read the text together with you whenever it's feasible, given time constraints and such things. As we do this, it's always valuable to keep in mind that one of the things that they would do in ancient Israel is periodically they would sit together and they would have someone read the laws aloud over others who had committed to follow them. So we are not people who are living under the first covenant, but nonetheless, it's very valuable for us to just patiently listen to the word. So let me read, if I could, all of chapter 19 and all of chapter 20. Here's what they say. The Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the entire assembly of Israel and say to them, 'Be holy, because I, the Lord your God, am holy. Each of you must respect your mother and father, and you must observe my Sabbaths. I am the Lord your God. Do not turn to idols or make metal gods for yourselves. I am the Lord your God. When you sacrifice a fellowship offering to the Lord, sacrifice it in such a way that it will be accepted on your behalf. It shall be eaten on the day you sacrifice it or on the next day. Anything left over until the third day must be burned up. If any of it is eaten on the third day, it is impure and will not be accepted. Whoever eats it will be held responsible because they have desecrated what is holy to the Lord. They must be cut off from their people. When you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edges of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Do not go over your vineyard a second time or pick up the grapes that have fallen. Leave them for the poor and the foreigner. I am the Lord your God. Do not steal, do not lie, do not deceive one another. Do not swear falsely by my name and so profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. Do not defraud or rob your neighbor. Do not hold back the wages of a hired worker overnight. Do not curse the deaf or put a stumbling block in front of the blind, but fear your God. I am the Lord. Do not pervert justice. Do not show partiality to the poor or favoritism to the great, but judge your neighbor fairly. Do not go about spreading slander among your people. Do not do anything that endangers your neighbor's life. I am the Lord. Do not hate a fellow Israelite in your heart. Rebuke your neighbor frankly so you will not share in their guilt. Do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against anyone among your people, but love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. Keep my decrees. Do not mate different kinds of animals. Do not plant your field with two kinds of seed. Do not wear clothing woven of two kinds of material. If a man sleeps with a female slave who is promised to another man, but who has not been ransomed or given her freedom, there must be due punishment. Yet they are not to be put to death because she had not been freed. The man, however, must bring a ram to the entrance to the tent of meeting for a guilt offering to the Lord. With the ram of the guilt offering, the priest is to make atonement for him before the Lord for the sin he has committed, and his sin will be forgiven. When you enter the land and plant any kind of fruit tree, regard its fruit as forbidden. For 3 years you are to consider it forbidden. It must not be eaten. In the 4th year all its fruit will be holy, an offering of praise to the Lord. But in the 5th year you may eat its fruit. In this way your harvest will be increased. I am the Lord your God. Do not eat any meat with blood still in it. Do not practice divination or seek omens. Do not cut the hair at the sides of your head or clip off the edges of your beard. Do not cut your bodies for the dead or put tattoo marks on yourselves. I am the Lord. Do not degrade your daughter by making her a prostitute, or the land will turn to prostitution and be filled with wickedness. Observe my Sabbaths and have reverence for my sanctuary. I am the Lord. Do not turn to mediums or seek out spiritists, for you will be defiled by them. I am the Lord your God. Stand up in the presence of the aged. Show respect for the elderly and revere your God. I am the Lord. When a foreigner resides among you in your land, do not mistreat them. The foreigner residing among you must be treated as your native born. Love them as yourself, for you were foreigners in Egypt. I am the Lord your God. Do not use dishonest standards when measuring length, weights, or quantity. Use honest scales and honest weights, an honest ephah and an honest hin. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt. Keep all my decrees and all my laws and follow them. I am the Lord. The Lord said to Moses, "Say to the Israelites, any Israelite or any foreigner residing in Israel who sacrifices any of his children to Molech is to be put to death. The members of the community are to stone him. I myself will set my face against him and will cut him off from his people. For by sacrificing his children to Molech, he has defiled my sanctuary and profaned my holy name. If the members of the community close their eyes when that man sacrifices one of his children to Molech, and if they fail to put him to death, I myself will set my face against him and his family and will cut them off from their people, together with all who follow him in prostituting themselves to Molech. I will set my face against anyone who turns to mediums and spiritists to prostitute themselves by following them, and I will cut them off from their people. Consecrate yourselves and be holy, because I am the Lord your God. Keep my decrees and follow them. I am the Lord who makes you holy. Anyone who curses their father or mother is to be put to death. Because they have cursed their father or mother, their blood will be on their own head. If a man commits adultery with another man's wife, the wife of his neighbor, both the adulterer and the adulteress are to be put to death. If a man has sexual relations with his father's wife, he has dishonored his father. Both the man and the woman are to be put to death. Their blood will be on their own heads. If a man has sexual relations with his daughter-in-law, both of them are to be put to death. What they have done is a perversion. Their blood will be on their own heads. If a man has sexual relations with a man, as one does with a woman, both of them have done what is detestable. They are to be put to death. Their blood will be on their own heads. If a man marries both a woman and her mother, it is wicked. Both he and they must be burned in the fire, so that no wickedness will be among you. If a man has sexual relations with an animal, he is to be put to death, and you must kill the animal. If a woman approaches an animal to have sexual relations with it, kill both the woman and the animal. They are to be put to death. Their blood will be on their own heads. If a man marries his sister, the daughter of either his father or his mother, and they have sexual relations, it is a disgrace. They are to be publicly removed from their people. He has dishonored his sister and will be held responsible. If a man has sexual relations with a woman during her monthly period, he has exposed the source of her flow, and she also has uncovered it. Both of them are to be cut off from their people. Do not have sexual relations with the sister of either your mother or your father, for that would dishonor a close relative. Both of you would be held responsible. If a man has sexual relations with his aunt, he has dishonored his uncle. They will be held responsible. They will die childless. If a man marries his brother's wife, it is an act of impurity. He has dishonored his brother. They will be childless. Keep all my decrees and laws and follow them, so that the land where I am bringing you to live may not vomit you out. You must not live according to the customs of the nations I'm going to drive you out, because they did all these things. I abhorred them. But I said to you, you will possess their land. I will give it to you as an inheritance, a land flowing with milk and honey. I am the Lord your God, who has set you apart from the nations. You must therefore make a distinction between clean and unclean animals and between clean and unclean birds. Do not defile yourselves by any animal or bird or anything that moves along the ground, those that I have set apart as unclean for you. You are to be holy to me, because I, the Lord, am holy, and I have set you apart from the nations to be my own. A man or a woman who is a medium or spiritist among you must be put to death. You are to stone them. Their blood will be on their own heads. Well, that is a lot of intense revelation from the Lord. It is the laws that God has given Israel through Moses. And when you read those, I don't know what your impression is of them, but I would imagine that it's probably somewhat similar. I'd like to ask a few questions together, really, of this text. First of all, just what should we make of them? What should we think of these laws in general? And then secondly, we'll talk about what we can learn from them. What should we make of these laws? My guess is that our response to these, at least in an immediate sense, tends to be somewhat similar in that we see them as a list of rules. That's what it feels like. Do not. This is the time before, you are going to play at the park or the pool or vacation with your family or whatever, and mom and dad sit the kids down and say, listen, all right, here's the deal. Don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. It's a list of rules, and a particularly long and intense one. I think also that there's a sense in which if we were under these rules, we would find them to be a burden. It feels like this imposition, like don't, boundary. And so it just is kind of overwhelming almost. Part of why I wanted to read them instead of just generalizing about them is because to get that sense of, okay, there's so many things I'm not supposed to do. Is how we feel after looking at this. But we sort of relax ourselves by seeing this as a custom. You know what I mean? We tell ourselves, well, look, there's a bunch of rules that are kind of a burden if you had to follow them, but the good news is we don't have to follow them because they're not for us. And by custom, I just mean these are rules for someone else. These are a certain way of doing things that is different from the way we do things. I would guess, again, that for the most part, there's some similarities in terms of how we see those things. And I would suggest to you that at every point, we are at best half correct. It's not that these are entirely wrong. There is, at some level, a little bit of truth to all of them. But I think this would be an improper framing of what you see here when you look at the laws in Leviticus 19 and 20. Instead of rules, I really think that we should see these as tools for wisdom. We're used to separating out the different portions of Scripture into different genres, and that is appropriate. But sometimes our categories aren't the most helpful. Sometimes we see laws as these, commands like legal decrees over here, the rules that you have to follow. And then we see the wisdom literature of like Proverbs over here. And these are general principles that are designed to help you think and to help you discern how best to walk in God's will in a particular situation. My favorite Proverbs are 26:4 and 5. Not my favorite, but the ones that help us understand what's going on. 26:4 says, "Do not answer a fool according to his folly, or you'll be just like him." So if you see somebody acting a fool, don't try to correct them or you'll get sucked in. And the very next verse says, "Answer a fool according to his folly, or he will be wise in his own eyes." If you see someone acting a fool, step in and do something, or else he's going to think that's fine. Why would you have these contradictory laws? Well, because the point is, they're designed to get you to think about how best to apply the wisdom of God in a particular situation. And our rules, these laws, aren't exactly proverbs. They are commands, they are decrees. But one of the things that I think is an exciting development in studies of the Old Testament is a recognition that these categories aren't as distinct as we may have at times treated them. And so when we see these rules, what we should see them are, in some sense, these general principles that are designed to help us think about life a certain way so that we might discern God's will. When it comes to the second piece, I think that we, instead of seeing these things as a burden, need to, in a sense, learn to see them the way the Israelites saw them, and that is as a gift. I'm thinking about Deuteronomy chapter 4, where Moses is talking to the people in his final sermon, and he says, what God is so great as to be near when we pray to him? What God is so good as to give us his laws? And this communicated how the Israelites saw the law, as a great gift. Either you have no idea what God wants from you and you're just sort of left to try to figure it out, or you have the law, you have the Torah, you have the instructions that God has given. And so they regarded them as a wonderful gift. I think also in this regard about Psalm 119, this longest psalm, really longest chapter in the whole Bible, which is just a praise of God for giving us his law, for giving us his command, his decrees, his instructions. So they would have seen the laws as no less a gift than the sun that brings warmth and the rain that brings life. Not a burden, but a gift. And the last thing is, I think we need to adjust away from seeing these merely as customs towards seeing these as revelation. And I'm not talking about the book of Revelation. I'm talking about that this is something that God has revealed to us. Now, it may not come immediately to us because we are not Israelites living under the first covenant, but this isn't just something to dismiss as customs for another time and place. No, this is divine revelation that we are to receive as a gift from God so that we might grow in wisdom. So I think here about different statements about the law in the New Testament. Jesus himself said in Matthew chapter 5, "Don't think I've come to abolish them, I've come to fulfill them." That may mean that we don't follow them literally in the same way they did, but it also means that he goes on to say that not a single jot or tittle will be removed until everything is accomplished. Not a single line or marking will be taken away, because the law is God's unchanging revelation. Then in Romans chapter 7, Paul says the law is holy and righteous and good. In a context of talking about the law's inability to transform us, he still holds it up as a good thing that God has given that reflects his goodness. So as important as looking at specific laws is, it really is a situation where we need to get our minds right and to think about them properly, not as rules that come to us as a burden, but thankfully they're just customs for others, but rather as God's revelation, this gift that he's given to help make us wise. This just kind of begs the question, though, of, okay, so if they are indeed divine revelation given for our wisdom, what can we learn from them? And I'd like to break that down for us as well, and to really talk about some general principles. We'll look at some of the specific laws, but to really isolate and identify some general principles that will help you go back to Leviticus 19 and 20 to meditate on them slowly and to learn what you may receive from God in them. And here, once again, no surprises. Really, the biggest thing to realize is that the laws are anchored in God. So because God is sort of how you'd begin any sort of clarification of what's going on in these laws. One of the things that you see is because God is not like other gods, we are not like other people. So you have here, we'll just write the word holy to represent the call to be different. Because God is holy, we are called to be holy. You saw that statement in there multiple times. And I'm sure as I was working through this, you noticed the refrain, "I am the Lord." I mean, it happens over and over and over. I, the Lord your God, am holy. Verse 2. Verse 4, I am the Lord your God. Verse 10, I am the Lord your God. Verse 12, I am the Lord. 14, I am the Lord. 16, I am the Lord. 18, I am the Lord. 25, I am the Lord your God. 28, I am the Lord. 31, I am the Lord. I am the Lord your God. 32, I am the Lord. 33, I am the Lord your God. I mean, it just keeps on going over and over and over. And so there's this sense in which he's saying, I am Yahweh. I am Yahweh. I am the God who saved you. I am the God who revealed himself to you. I am me. I'm not some other God. And because I'm me, you're called to be you. And you see toward the end, we very clearly that this means we're called to be different. You must not live according to the customs of the nations. I'm going to drive you out. Their sin is actually part of what caused them to be expelled. And he's saying, I don't want you to be expelled. I want to expel you. So I want you to recognize that because I'm not like other gods, you are not like other people. And it's not just a question of, be different. It's a question of be mine. That's the key thing to see here. It's not just about, hey, look at what they are and don't be like them. And no, look at what God is and be like him. Let's continue to remember this formula that we've discovered, that when we look at the laws, of course, there's the specific precept that we're looking at, where we're trying to figure out, okay, there's a specific thing that God has told us to do, but the precept is actually anchored in a principle. So don't lie or bear false testimony. That's the precept. And the principle is a community will only live at peace when people are telling the truth. Like, that's just how it works. But at a deeper level, this is a revelation of who God is. It always is traced back to the person of God. And so here you have God is truthful, and therefore we need to be a truthful community. Therefore, you should not bear false testimony in court. So whenever you're looking at the laws, remember that we are called to be different because we are called to be his, because he is good and he's been good to us. We are called to walk in his goodness. Also notice that in the same regard, a lot of these laws take the shape of practical expressions of the Ten Commandments that are really functioning as a call to worship. The function of the laws is not just to tell us what to do, it's to consistently call us back to worship. So this is the kind of obviously the most important point to see in these texts, is that because God is holy, we are called to be holy. There's also the idea, though, that because God is ruler of all, he gets to rule all. Because God is ruler of all, there's no portion of life that's sort of separate from his life. And so I'm just going to write the word all. You could think comprehensive or thorough. Because God is the ruler of all the world and of all of our lives are to be lived in obedience to him. There's no portion of life that is beyond the call to obedience. Notice the coverage. I mean, we've got everything from regulating who you have sex with, to making sure that you stand out of respect for the ages, to talking about various practices whenever a person dies. How do you mourn for them? Well, you don't do it by cutting yourself and tattooing yourself. You look through here, and it's almost comical when you think about the variety of laws here. Don't make different kinds of animals. Also, don't go over your fields twice so that the poor people have something to eat. But also, don't favor the poor people. Don't favor anybody. Be perfectly just in these things. Oh, and observe my Sabbaths. Oh, and you get the point. There's just kind of this onslaught of no part of our life is compartmentalized away from God's call to obedience. And this might be relevant, too, to think about with respect to the culture around them. Remember that in the ancient culture, unlike our modern, at least in the West, secular cultures, in the ancient world, they had different gods that were associated with all sorts of things. So if you wanted your sex lives to be, flourishing, then you would probably devote yourself toward a particular god in that way. If you wanted your crops to flourish, then you would worship another god. If you wanted your future to be secure, if you wanted political stability, if you wanted military peace, you would worship all these various gods. And I think part of the point of the comprehensiveness here is that there is only one God who rules over all. Not many gods to whom you owe your devotion, but one God to whom you owe all your devotion. And so there is this sense in which, because God is ruler over all, he rules over all. And the last thing would be, or the third principle to see here, is that because God is the source of life, the author of life, disobedience brings death, but obedience increases life. The stakes are incredibly high. As you walk through here, you probably notice, I always have marked in my Bible in the margins anytime we see the death penalty, because I want to think about, well, what are the things that were so serious that the penalty for these things was death? And a lot of things, of course, we could talk about here, and a lot of ethical questions that we could raise about how to read this with respect to our culture. And some of those things are a little bit beyond what we're going to try to cover in one session. But I just want to notice the basic framework for now so that we can meditate well. And the basic framework here is that disobedience to God's laws brings death. Certainly, the death penalty texts are relevant for our moral reasoning. But even before that, I think it's important that we don't miss why they're in there. The death penalty isn't just a random, I'm going to smite you now. In a way, it's God closing the loop or fast forwarding the movie a little bit. When you take part in these behaviors, the result of these things is death. Like that is the consequence of what you're doing. And so we're going to go ahead and act now, demonstrating the consequence of this form of behavior because this is a wrong thing for you to do. And so it's a just penalty. And also hopefully because it serves as a deterrent. Even the threatening of these things serves as a deterrent away from these forms of behavior that bring about death. And so you have the idea that disobedience brings death, and also the notion that adherence to these laws increases life. In a very general sense, you see that that's the case. I'm always struck by how critical the Old Testament places emphasis on respecting your father and mother, which they knew, and we know if we're thinking about it, that is the first command with a promise, that it will go well with you, that you will have a long life. And so you've got this idea in a general sense that adherence increases life. You've also got, last little detail I want to point out to you, you've also got the specific sense in that I think that these laws are structured in such a way that we're trying to not so much return to Eden, but you see echoes of Eden in the sense that God is trying to restore the type of life that he called for from the people. I don't know if you caught that. I'll just look at one example. I don't know if you caught it there. Toward the end of chapter 19, verse 23 says, when you enter the land and plant any kind of fruit tree, regard its fruit as forbidden. For 3 years you're to consider it forbidden. It must not be eaten. In the 4th year, all its fruit will be holy, an offering of praise to the Lord. But in the 5th year, you may eat its fruit. In this way, your harvest will be increased. I am the Lord. Now, at one level, this is just telling them, hey, don't pick all the first fruit because you might actually damage the tree. Give it some time to flower. But there are obvious connotations here of the story in Genesis chapter 3. That God is saying, hey, I once put my people in a garden that was designed to be a place of peace and life, and I gave them some boundaries, and they broke the boundaries and brought death. So I'm putting you in a garden that's designed to be a place of peace and life, and I'm going to give you a similar boundary, and hopefully you remember how things went for them. That when they didn't trust me to give them wisdom in my time and way, they actually became fools. To give them life as I decided, they actually became persons of death. Why don't you avoid a similar fate? And so that's just one example of a few that we could point out that are really kind of in a way that echoes other passages in Scripture, specifically the Edenic paradise of Genesis before the fall, helping us understand that because God is the source of life, disobedience brings death, but adherence increases life. Those are some reflections that I think might be valuable for us to both understand what we just read and, as always, to go back to these things in a way that enables us to continue to learn more and more. If I could take you back right here at the very end to where we began, I want you to realize that while there's our natural tendency may indeed be to see this as a list of rules that feels like a burden, but good news at somebody else's customs, it would be much more profitable for you and the people you love to see this as a gift of revelation that is designed to bring us wisdom. So may we indeed receive the gifts of God revelation, and may we walk wisely in these gifts that God has given. And may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace.